They say comedians are the saddest people alive. But no one expected that behind Australia's most beloved comic character, Kim Craig from Kath and Kim, was a woman slowly unraveling. Gina Riley made millions laugh. Her wit, her timing, her magnetic screen presence became part of Australia's cultural identity. But what no one saw was the silence after the laughter stopped. For years, Gina disappeared from the spotlight without warning. No farewell tour, no public breakdown, no explanation, just absence. Fans speculated, was it retirement, burnout, or something darker? Only much later did whispers begin to surface. Panic attacks, severe anxiety, emotional collapse behind closed doors. The same woman who mocked suburban pretensions with such brilliance had been quietly consumed by her own inner demons. The truth is as heartbreaking as it is haunting. Gina Riley didn't just step back from fame. She was fighting to survive in a world that expected her to be funny, even when she couldn't breathe. This is not the story of a fall from grace. It's the story of what fame costs when your mind begins to break. In this video, we uncover the fragile truth behind one of Australia's most iconic comedians. From stardom to silence, from laughter to the shadows of mental health, this is the story they never told you. Until now. To understand Gina Riley's story, one must first understand what she represented to an entire generation of Australians. Born in Melbourne in 1961, Gina emerged during a golden age of television satire in Australia. While many female performers of the time were relegated to sidekick roles or scripted as decorative figures, Gina Riley shattered those limitations with a rare combination of musicality, intelligence, and biting humor. Her early appearances on Fast Forward and Big Girl's Blouse marked the arrival of a voice that refused to be quiet or conventional. But it was Kath and Kim, the satirical masterpiece co-created with her longtime collaborator Jane Turner, that turned her into a household name. As Kim Craig, the petulant, narcissistic daughter in a hyper-real suburban fantasy, Gina Riley became immortalized in the Australian psyche. Her voice, with that iconic nasal whine, "Look at Moye, Kimmy, look at Moye," was more than just comedy. It was a mirror to the country's own social quirks. The show wasn't just funny, it was culturally seismic. What few people realized, however, was that the role which brought so much laughter also came with an invisible weight. While the characters were over the top and outrageous, the work behind them was painstakingly precise. Gina wasn't just playing Kim, she was writing her, producing her, breathing life into every scene, every punchline. The emotional and creative investment was total. By the mid-2000s, Kath and Kim had become a sensation, spawning international adaptations and a cult following. Gina had it all: fame, accolades, creative control, and the respect of the industry. Yet even as her career soared, a quiet retreat had already begun. She began turning down interviews, avoiding red carpets, limiting public appearances. Eventually, she stopped performing altogether. For many, it seemed like a well-earned retirement, a choice to step away while still on top. But for those who knew her, the reality was far more complex. Behind the scenes, Gina Riley was battling something few could see, but many artists feel: a growing, crippling sense of dread. The theme we explore here is not the decay of talent or the scandal of failure. It is the haunting dissonance between public perception and private agony. How could someone so beloved, so celebrated, be simultaneously falling apart? What was happening inside the mind of the woman who gave the nation so much joy, while she herself began to fear the very stage that made her a star? In the story that follows, we go beyond the glitz of comedy and into the raw, unspoken terrain of mental health. Gina Riley's journey is not just a personal one. It reflects a deeper truth about the entertainment industry, about the fragility of performers, and about how easily brilliance can be mistaken for invincibility. This isn't just her story, it's a cautionary tale for all who believe that success protects you from suffering. It doesn't. Sometimes it hides it even better. Gina Riley's entry into the world of entertainment wasn't accidental, it was inevitable. From a young age, she showed an instinctive flair for performance. She trained in musical theater and had the kind of voice that could both mesmerize an audience and reduce it to laughter. Unlike many contemporaries who specialized in either drama or comedy, Gina had an uncanny ability to blend both, delivering biting satire wrapped in theatrical polish. Her early career was defined by stage performances that highlighted her vocal strength and timing. But it was television sketch comedy where she began to craft her true legacy. Shows like The Degeneration, Fast Forward, and Full Frontal gave her a platform to experiment, to shape personas, and most importantly, to assert a bold female comedic voice in a field often dominated by men. She was daring, fearless, and never afraid to look ridiculous if it served the joke. It wasn't long before critics and fans alike began to recognize a rare talent, a woman who could write, sing, and deliver punchlines with surgical precision. Then came Kath Kim. It wasn't just a show, it was a cultural moment. Premiering in 2002, Kath Kim felt like a revolution. In a media landscape filled with American imports and stylized dramas, the show dared to turn its camera toward the mundane and made it hilarious. The characters were exaggerated yet eerily familiar. Kim's obsession with herself, Kath's unbreakable optimism, Sharon's perpetual loneliness, it all struck a chord. People laughed, not because it was absurd, but because it was real. And behind the humor, behind Kim's overdrawn lip liner and velour tracksuits, was Gina Riley, co-creator, co-writer, and performer. She didn't just act, she built the entire framework of the show with Jane Turner. Every gesture, every scene, every pause in the script was part of a comedy architecture that was smarter than it first appeared. With Kath Kim, Gina achieved what most artists only dream of: total creative control, commercial success, and cultural impact. Awards followed. International acclaim came next. Even Kath Kim, though critically mixed, was a commercial success and a testament to the strength of the brand they had created. But success, as it so often does, came with a cost. What the public didn't see was the exhaustion behind the scenes. Gina, known to be deeply private and meticulous, began to feel the pressure of living up to the public image she helped create. She wasn't just expected to play Kim, she was expected to be Kim, on demand, in interviews, in public, on every red carpet. Slowly, signs of fatigue began to surface. She started withdrawing from the media circuit. While Jane Turner continued occasional public engagements, Gina increasingly stayed away. She declined high-profile events, opted out of revivals, and refused to chase international expansion that many felt was inevitable. Some chalked it up to creative discretion. Others wondered if something was wrong, and something was. Though still in her early 50s, Gina Riley's dazzling momentum had begun to slow. Friends later recalled that she became less communicative, more guarded, and visibly drained. Her public appearances dwindled until they stopped altogether. When Kath Kim briefly returned in 2022 for a 20-year reunion, fans were elated. But for Gina, it was one of the last flickers of a career she no longer had the strength or will to maintain. The woman who once lit up stages and screen was quietly fading into the background, not because she wanted to, but because her mind was asking for mercy, and almost no one noticed. When Gina Riley finally broke her silence, it wasn't with a headline or a tell-all interview. It was in a brief, almost hidden moment, buried within a quiet statement, far from the blinding lights she once commanded. "I was struggling," she admitted. Not physically, not professionally, but mentally. And she had been for years. The Gina Riley the public adored was sharp-tongued, flamboyant, brimming with confidence. But the real Gina, behind the laughter, had long been drowning in waves of anxiety, sleeplessness, and emotional collapse. Panic attacks gripped her without warning. She described nights when she couldn't sleep, afraid her heart might stop. She would cancel meetings, avoid sets, pull out of appearances, not because she was arrogant, but because the act of being Gina Riley the performer had become unbearable. Some of her closest collaborators knew. Jane Turner, her creative partner, once alluded to Gina's need for distance, to protect her peace. But no one went into details. There was a silent understanding in the industry. Gina needed space, and no one questioned it. Until now, few ever understood just how deep the spiral went. Behind the carefully managed public image was a woman crumbling under her own expectations. The high-functioning nature of her anxiety masked the severity of her condition. She could still perform, still make people laugh, but every performance left her more depleted. There were days, a former coworker noted, when she would light up the set and then vanish into silence for hours. She was burning herself out quietly, elegantly, invisibly. The cruel irony is that comedy, her gift, her weapon, her livelihood, was also her prison. As Kim Craig, she had to be loud, foolish, excessive. But in real life, Gina was introspective, sensitive, and intensely private. The dissonance began to tear at her psyche. Audiences demanded more Kim. Gina wanted less of everything. And the media, like it often does, speculated without knowing. Rumors of arrogance, of diva behavior, of artistic fatigue began to swirl. No one considered that she might be deeply unwell. Mental illness, especially in celebrities, is rarely met with compassion. It's met with whispers. What makes Gina's case even more heartbreaking is that she didn't crash publicly. There were no scandalous breakdowns, no rehab admissions, no televised meltdowns. Her collapse was quiet, and that made it easier to ignore. But to those who listened, her few admissions carried weight. She spoke once of not being built for the pressure, of constant attention, of being unable to switch off after performing. Her mental state didn't align with the glossy image of success. And so, the world simply turned away. In truth, Gina Riley was not an exception. She was a painful example of a recurring truth in show business, that those who give us the most joy often suffer the most in silence. She wasn't the first comic to hide behind a smile, but the cost she paid, a career slowly abandoned, a public persona she could no longer carry, was deeply personal. The press eventually moved on. New stars emerged, but for many Australians, there was always a lingering question. Where did Gina go? Now we know. She went to find peace in a world that had demanded her laughter, but never cared to ask if she was okay. At Aussie Uncovered, we don't just look at fame, we look at the fractures behind it. And Gina Riley's story is one of the most quietly devastating we've ever uncovered. It's tempting to define Gina solely by Kath and Kim, an iconic role that revolutionized Australian comedy, gave voice to suburban satire, and made millions laugh. But to do so would be to reduce her legacy to just the surface. What lies beneath is a far more complex, more human, and frankly, more important narrative. Gina Riley was not just a comedian, she was a creator, a woman who refused to be boxed in, who wrote her own characters, built her own world, and did it all with staggering intelligence. Her career was not an accident. It was a masterpiece of control, vision, and talent. She didn't ride trends, she made them. And yet, despite all that control, she could not hold off what was happening inside her own mind. We believe Gina Riley's legacy should not be remembered only for the laughter she created, but for the silent courage it took to walk away. In a culture that demands constant output and punishes absence, stepping back is often mistaken for failure. But what if it's survival? What if Gina's greatest act of strength wasn't playing Kim Craig, but choosing her own well-being over the demands of public expectation? We also ask, why are we so quick to consume artists and so slow to protect them? Why is mental health still seen as a footnote in stories of celebrity instead of a central chapter? Gina's story reminds us that brilliance and brokenness are not mutually exclusive. In fact, they often coexist. This channel believes that Gina Riley deserves more than nostalgia. She deserves understanding. She deserves recognition, not just as a performer, but as a person who fought an invisible battle with grace and dignity. Her silence was not emptiness. It was a boundary, and it deserves to be respected. To our audience, we ask, how many stars have we lost in the same way, bit by bit, in silence, while we waited for their next joke? Maybe it's time we changed what we value. Not just the moments they shine, but the moments they need rest. Not just their characters, but their humanity. Gina Riley gave us some of the greatest laughs in Australian television history. Maybe now it's our turn to give her something back. Empathy, space, and the permission to be more than what she made us feel. That's our view. Now we want to hear yours. What did Gina Riley mean to you? Did you ever wonder what happened after the curtains closed? And do you think we as a society are finally ready to listen when the laughter stops? She once stood under the studio lights, wrapped in sequins and sarcasm, delivering lines that made a nation howl with laughter. But long after the applause faded, Gina Riley was left with something no audience could see, the hollow silence of a heart that no longer found comfort in the spotlight. We remember Kim Craig, the velour tracksuits, the dramatic eye rolls, the delicious absurdity of it all. But behind every line, There was a woman who crafted those moments with care, then paid for them in silence. For those of us who grew up with her, who quoted her, who still smile at her catchphrases, it's sobering to realize that our joy may have been carved from her exhaustion. Yet maybe that's the true mark of a great artist, to give without letting us see the cost. Today, Gina Riley lives away from the cameras. No encore tours, no red carpets, just a quiet existence beyond the noise she once mastered. And perhaps that's the most radical act of all, to reclaim her life not as a performer, but as a person. Some stories never get told, not because they aren't powerful, but because they're too quiet, too painful, too real. But now, you know. You know the story of a woman who made the nation laugh while privately struggling to stay afloat. You know the truth behind the character, the pain behind the performance. And you also know this: Gina Riley didn't disappear. She just chose herself. Her legacy isn't only what we saw on screen. It's in the echoes of her voice that still live in our memories. It's in the characters we quote, the episodes we replay, and now, in the quiet respect we hold for the woman behind it all. Some stars don't fade, they retreat. And in doing so, they leave behind something even more lasting than fame: understanding, vulnerability, and the kind of impact that lingers not just in culture, but in the conscience. Some stories are never told, but now you know.